this is, paraphrasing with considerable liberty, but Heidegger basically says, I'm having trouble. I'm sort of worried because I'm really understanding Plato, and there's nothing for me to say. There's nothing for me to say. And then he turns.
Heidegger says that.
Yes. And then he turns and then he says, no, wait.
There's nothing for my ego to say.
Yes, right. And then, no, Plato is actually the villain of the story of the history of metaphysics. Plato turns being into metaphysics and launches us down the
So he finds a convenient demon and puts himself in as a counterposition.
Yeah, and I think that desensitizes him to the Socratic dimension.
And that's driven by egotism.
Yeah,
and that's the hook for the Nazis.
I think so. And I mean, and one of the
inner totalitarian has to welcome the outer totalitarian.
Oh, that's well said. That's very well said. I like that.
Yes, well, that's what makes me skeptical about people who claim that power structures human relations. Is that a proposition or a confession, dear sir?
Mm.
And, I had this really interesting experience, John. I was debating Slavoj Zizek.
Yeah.
And I started with a critique of the Communist Manifesto, which, according to my critics, only indicated my rabid ignorance of Marx. But despite that, I thought it was a central document in all of my ignorance. And I talked about its call to bloody, violent revolution. And a quarter of the audience laughed and cheered. And it stopped me in my tracks for like 5 seconds. I thought, Freud should be here to hear and Jung as well, to hear the Freudian slip, but to hear the collective unconscious manifest itself so clearly in the relative secrecy of the crowd. And so is it that power structures human relations, my dear Marxist postmodernists, or is it that that's the inner totalitarian within you cheering the outer totalitarian on and justifying it? Because if power is the fundamental motivation, then why shouldn't I use my will to power as my fundamental motivation? Or if I do use my will to power as my fundamental motivation, why shouldn't I justify that by the criticism that is, in fact, once the blinders are off, the central human motivation, and therefore I'm entirely justified in my attempts, just like all the great people throughout time. And that's what's riveting our culture apart, I believe.
I think, I think the glorification of power. I would say that they're just like Heidegger.
The deification of power as the ultimate motivational personality.
But I would say that has a considerable history, and I think it goes back to the rise of the scientific revolution and the understanding of God. I mean, it predates the scientific revolution. When you get the nominalism of Scotus and Occam, and say there are no real patterns in the world. You denude the world of logos, and then you understand yourself and God as will, right? That for me, and I talk about this in the series, that's there's a fundamental change. Look at how rapidly things, look at it by the time of Shakespeare. God is just this sort of this absurd power that's on the fringes of intelligibility, and that's somebody as sensitive to cultural depth as Shakespeare, and he's getting it. He's really getting it. It's like, what happened?
Right, and if you're an author, by the way, you could equally say, I've read and understood Shakespeare. What is there left for me to say?
Yes.
And you'd be equally wrong and equally right.
Yeah, I think so. I think that there has. And we talked about this around the notion of dogma. I mean, if you don't understand faith, in the way it is in the Old Testament, faith is to be coupled to God, married to God. It's more like faithfulness than it is the assertion of belief without evidence.
Yes, definitely.
But when you move to that notion of faith, and we now use the word belief, and we forget that it originally comes from the German beleben, right? Beleben, to give your heart to something. But we now understand it as assertion. And what is assertion? It is an act of will. So at the heart, right at the heart even of our theology, we have the will to power. And that's why Heidegger's critique of Nietzsche,
rather than the will to humility,
or what Aquinas was trying to save, which is love, right? Love is when the will is moved by something outside of the will, or something like that. But that's why Heidegger's critique of Nietzsche is so profound. I mean, now to say something positive about Heidegger, right? Because Nietzsche says, well, here's this structure of Christianity, and all Nietzsche does is invert it. And the will to power is in both. And Heidegger says, no, you're still bound to it insofar as you're just negating it. What you have to do is, right, try to get outside of it. You have to break the shared presuppositions of both sides. I say something similar with, I think that I want to break free from the shared set of presupposition between the modern theists and the modern atheists. That's why I call myself a non-theist, because I think non-theism is the attempt to say the shared presuppositions are ultimately misframing our relationship with sacredness, and we need to get beyond them. And it's not only a philosophical argument. The mystics, I would say, converge in a position that's very much like non-theism.
John, I'm going to stop us there.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's a fine closing statement, and good, because I'm done.
Well,
thank you very much. It's an inexhaustible conversation, and
thank you.
I appreciate you participating in it very much.
Well, thank you for having me. And
I've been a great proponent of yours. I mean that in the sense of noting the greatness that's in you, and seeing how it's manifested itself, especially in your relationship with your students, and noticing that, and having admiration and respect for that.
And I respect your work, and I disagree with it in parts, but we've always been able to do that in a way that is born with affection and respect.
Well, God, it's always nice to find someone who disagrees with your work who could help correct it.
Exactly. Seeing the other.
Thank God, man. That's why I want to talk to you. I don't like being wrong. So, and I know you don't. And so no, exactly. No doubt we're still both pretty wrong.
Mostly so. If the history of science is something we should pay attention to, which we should.
Yes, or the history of our own life, for that matter.
Yeah.
All right, John. Thank you very much.
Take good care.
We'll talk again, man. Definitely.
I would like that. I would like that very much.
I would like it too. So we'll set it up.